The next section for TA southbounders is the town of Palmerston north to Levin, and it is 43.7 miles. Many TA hikers will try to avoid the town of Levin, but I will explain why we went into that town later in the video once we get there. It is about 6 miles off the official route, so I will explain that later. So when you leave the town of Palmerston north, you start this Riverwalk, which is very, very pretty. Not a whole lot of water access. Again, it comes down to preference. I would personally not drink river, but I would recommend packing out that water for this upcoming day. And you cross the bridge, which signifies the end of your river walk, and then you start this kind of farm community kind of hybrid road, 2-track, single-track walk for a few miles. And this track has a lot of micro ups and downs, so it will hit your pace a little bit, and you'll be shaking off some of that town gravity trying to get up and down these climbs. So you walk through this kind of forested area, and this is one of the more consistent climbs that will lead you up onto a plateau. And on this plateau you have kind of broad sweeping views of the farmland around you, and you kind of walk through this kind of 2-track area. So there's a little playground. Again, it's not a big logistical part or informational part. I just kept this piece of film in here because we needed to dry some stuff out, and it was a good little break spot. So you have a lot of those on the North Island, as I've talked about. Here is kind of that mixture I was talking about, this like 2-track, single track, back and forth, back and forth. The trail tries to route you off the road as much as possible, as you see here, but it is a mixture, so just get prepared for that. And you continue along, and ultimately this route will bring you into a forested section. So this forested section has a quote-unquote secret shelter, and I don't feel guilty for talking about it here because it is listed in the map systems, but it's a shelter that's almost specifically oriented for TA through hikers, and it's called the Araroa shelter. And a lot of hikers, if they're leaving Palmerston north, will decide to camp there. I'll talk about that as we get closer to that piece of film. As you see here, the rolling hills, as I was talking about, it's up, down, up, down, up, down. The trail maintenance is very good when you do go into that single track portion, so you can continuously hold a pace. Overall, you can do anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 miles per hour comfortably. Again, as a ballpark, some people will go faster or slower. So some people do decide to camp here if they get a late start out of town, the Araroa Reserve, pardon my pronunciation. It is just easier access if you get out of town late, and it avoids a longer prolonged climb that is directly after that. I am not sure if that campsite has water. If it's so, it is a natural source, so just be aware about that. We did see some campers down there. So the road will eventually lead you into this popular mountain biking track, so stay aware. As you saw there, I had to kind of dodge out of the way of a biker that was coming through. Ultimately, it will junction you off the mountain biking route and more into like a tramping, hiking style route. Just stay aware, a lot of bikers come up there. It is a very popular place for locals, I'm assuming, of Palmerston North. And this is the gradual climb I was talking about, and this day you will actually hit the quote-unquote halfway point of the Araroa Trail. So give yourself a photo, take a video, have a smile. It says 15 kilometers is the halfway point. Again, the mileage fluctuates, the kilometers fluctuate each year as additions and subtractions happen to this growing trail system. So after the halfway point, you're on road. There's not many folks that drive this road. It is on the backside of that mountain that I was talking about. There's another natural source there if you do need water. And this is the shelter, the Araroa shelter that I was mentioning. It is very nice inside. It can fit anywhere from 6 to 8 hikers, quote unquote, comfortably. If not, there's a lot of overflow. For camping, it does have a natural water source close by that you can access if you do need water at the end of the day. It is a very popular spot, so if you get there early, you might have space in the shelter. If you get there late, just pitch a tent. So this is what I was mentioning. The water source is directly behind this picnic table, and there's a little nice beaten down path that you can go there to access that. So the next day, a lot of the camp spots for this day are going to fluctuate depending on your pace, because this day is a lot of track, and the track is very, I don't want to say technical, but it is very slow going. So when you leave the camp, you start off with about 2 to 3 miles of 2-track / road stepping that will lead you to this track, Burton's track. And Burton's track is a kind of quote-unquote river track, but again, with the year that we did it, it had more climbs than anticipated. So these tracks that you're going to be hitting this day will heavily impact your pace. So build that into your itinerary. You will not know how far you can go depending how much rain it is. It can be muddier, it can be slow going, rocks, roots, steep up, steeps down. So I think ballpark that we held a somewhere in the 2 mile per hour pace, maybe a little bit above that, but we were pushing pretty hard. So this is a day that you will not be able to fully estimate your pace, which is very flavorful for New Zealand when you're not on a road. So it was really nice to get back into forested section. As you can see with the prior videos that I put out, not a whole lot of it. So this is a reroute that happened in 2022-23, and it junctions you off that river track or Burton's track. And this reroute, we didn't have a whole lot of information going into it. It is straight up and then straight back down the other side. So it's kind of a wash. You don't know if the river track would have been slower because of the micro ups and downs, but this was a consistent up. You touch the top of this unnamed just kind of bump on the land, and then you drop straight back down. So there is more elevation in this day than if you were just looking at the topo maps or the elevation profile, because there is that alternate in effect. Again, I don't know if this applies to the 2023-24 season, but I could see it being in effect for a while because I think it is a private landowner that wants hikers off that portion of the river. So ultimately, you will drop back down into the Burton's track, and you'll start seeing the TA markers again. The alternate is very well marked with flagging tape and TA markers, so you'll start seeing the TA kind of signposts itself. A lot of natural water sources through this area, so you really don't have to worry about this day carrying too much water if you're comfortable with filtering. There's also a lot of camp spots or potential camp areas here. I slowed down this piece of film because it shows very well what your future is about to be. It's a lot of this creek crossing to a patch of dry land, back to a creek crossing, back to a patch of dry land. It is pretty consistent, and I'll talk about that more as we get there. So here's a little washed out section that I filmed for you, just to show you that sometimes there are washouts and you just have to be careful and safe around those because it's a steep drop off the side. And this is that pseudo single track that I've talked about in past videos as well. As you can see, it fluctuates. Sometimes it's very overgrown, you can't see your steps, and sometimes it's pretty nicely cut in there. That's also a very kind of average flavor of New Zealand. So nice little steep up there for you. There's a nice micro up, as I've talked about. So this shelter, the Takarumu shelter, part of my pronunciation, a lot of hikers decide to utilize this if it's bad weather out, if they're going slower than anticipated in that track section. It's a nice shelter. I would personally camp outside. Again, it comes down to preference. It is nice if there's a lot of weather. So when you leave that shelter, you start, again, a connector piece of trail. I think it's about 1 mile to 2 of 2-track/road. You pass by this beautiful dam area, so soak in the views because it's about to get real. This track is one of the harder tracks up until this point on the North Island. I would say so. Again, it comes down to personal opinion, personal preference here. Those time splits, don't be too worried about them. You can shave off some time from those time splits, but it will take you longer than if you just anticipate a 2.5 to 3 mile per hour pace averaging for this section, because it is muddy, quite muddy. And sometimes it's not the mud that fully gets you, it's these little, as I've talked about, micro ups and downs that will heavily impact your pace, and that's a lot of what this section was. You do have a very long ascent as well after micro ups and downs, where it's consistent. That creek right there that I crossed was called Blackwood Stream, and I would recommend filling up there because the water situation gets a little tricky on your ascent and descent until you hit that backside, and especially not knowing what your pace will be, depending on the rain, depending on the mud. The Blackwood Stream is a key location to fill up those water bottles before it gets quote-unquote dry. It's not dry per se, but there's no accessible water. The ground is wet, you don't want mud. So when you get up to the top of the climb, you hit this place, and I'm going to butcher this name, so I apologize. It is Harakio Lookout. There's a scene coming up that will tell you the name because I cannot pronounce that. Horanua Lookout. So you hit this lookout, that kind of signifies your first top. There is going to be a kind of mini roller coaster to get to the second quote-unquote top, and that's also very average for New Zealand. You hit a first peak and then you kind of jump up and down for a while until you hit this next little peak. So that's Archie's Lookout. And this signifies the official top for when you start dropping elevation pretty consistently. And when you hit the bottom of your descent, this is where the trail can get tricky. So check your weather reports before going into here, because we have heard that this section can get quite flooded out. And I kept these scenes very long, and I kept a lot of them in there just to show you how consistent this portion is. It's anywhere from 3 to 5 miles of just being stuck in this creek bed, and you are just going over this creek back and forth consistently. And if it's been raining for days leading up to this point, as you can see, it just funnels all the water into there, and it can really get flooded. Again, I would check weather before going into this section and make sure that it hasn't been just absolutely pouring, absolutely flooded. Use your best judgment. Can't tell you what to do, only can give you information. So these are the creeks I'm talking about. Again, it never got too bad on us, knee high. This was our deepest ford right here. And it had been raining just today. It hadn't been raining the days up to this. So the more it rains, the more flooded those can get. So be very careful with that. I wanted to point that out because it can be quite sketchy. Once you finish that though, there's a nice camp spot on the other side if your miles link up. Privy, accessible water was the streams that you'd been crossing for a few miles. Back there, nice flat open expanse area there. And you eventually connect into this pseudo 2-track again that fluctuates between 2-track, a little bit of cross country, single track. There's this last river crossing you have, and I do not know if this actually floods that bad. I mean, all creeks and rivers have the potential to flood in New Zealand. Again, we were able to cross it pretty well. Just use your information, check the weather forecast. So once you get out of that track, you are officially done that portion of the forest, and you have some long connector pieces of road to get to the next entrance to the forest that we won't get into today because we're going into Levin, but ultimately you have a long connector road walk. So I kept this portion long because I wanted to show you the road. Nothing I'm saying right there is important. Nothing I do say is important. Anyway, you have this road piece, and there's this Makahakia, pardon my pronunciation, outdoor center. So a lot of hikers will also camp here if their miles link up, and they have a certain business hours, and when we got there they were closed, and it seemed it would have been okay, quote unquote, to camp there, but we wanted to be respectful, so we did not. I would call and reserve your spot ahead or let them know you're coming in, so you just feel confident that you are allowed to stay there. Because, yeah, it was closed when we got there, but it had massive amounts of land to camp on. So if you go past it, you have more road. This is the official trail going off that junction over there to the left or straight ahead. It's called Pod's Road. So if you hit Pod's Road, you can also coordinate with a trail angel around here that she'll pick you up and you can stay at her place. Again, we did not. We pushed ultimately to this place called Gladstone Reserve, which is about a half mile off the official TA, because it was the only public land around us that we felt comfortable camping. The day just got a little out of control for us. We thought we were going to camp at that outdoor center. Did not turn out that way. So we decided to go into the town of Levin. And this is what I wanted to explain. So if you don't go into the town of Levin, here you'll go directly into the Toraros, pardon my pronunciation, which is the hardest logistical and technical mountain range on the North Island. I would heavily recommend not going in there on bad weather, because you will end up either having to stay at a hut or moving literally underneath a mile-per-hour pace. So it was going to be a bad weather day, so we decided to go into Levin. And Levin's a full-service town, many amenities, many places to choose. We stayed at Zachary Motel because we had a few people to split the cost. Really nice motel, very friendly. They have laundry. You can dry out your stuff. And again, I want to point out the weather impact. I can't stress that enough. I've hiked many places throughout the years, but the Toraros are a very special mountain range that it's not, oh, it's bad weather, I guess I'll just grin and bear it. If you get bad weather there, it can turn into a full mudslide. It can turn really sketchy. You're already going through mud in good weather that's sometimes knee-high, if not more. So really be prepared. If it's bad weather, cannot recommend enough going into the town of Levin, waiting it out, even if it hits your pace. That's something you just might have to do. So we waited it out, had a nice time in Levin, and got ready for that mountain range.